Hello, I would like to speak a little bit about spirituality. As we know, there are many different expressions and definitions about spirituality. And I think the first place a person would go to, at least I would, is to Google the term spirituality and to see what's out there on the internet. That seems to be the quickest way to discover what is the general conversation on the topic. And so I Googled spirituality and I discovered, to my amazement, that there are over 135 million sites that deal with spirituality on the internet. And naturally, the first one that pops up is from Wikipedia, the Internet Encyclopedia. And the very first thing that you read is that it says the term spirituality lacks a definitive definition. And then the next site is from Psychology Today, and it makes this comment: spirituality means something different to everyone. It is precisely for this reason that I would like to offer a reflection on spirituality, how I understand it, and the research that I have done on this topic over the years, and specifically, how does spirituality relate to a Christian matrix, a Christian understanding. As I said earlier, there are many different understandings on the term spirituality. If you ask 100 people what spirituality means to them, you're going to find 100 different definitions. We have everything from the spirituality of dieting, bicycle riding, to New Age spirituality. We understand spirituality in terms of a New Age spirituality, Native American, Hindu, Buddhist, Islamic spirituality, as well as Christian and Catholic spirituality. But if there's going to be a conversation, it's very important that when we use a term, that we are all on the same page. When it comes to spirituality, I don't think we are on the same page as yet, because the definition is so ambiguous at the moment. Another expression that comes to my mind is, I'm spiritual but not religious. Well, what does that mean? Obviously, in this short period of this video, I cannot go into all of the expressions of spirituality, but suffice it to say that I would like to propose a definition in which perhaps we can talk about spirituality and have a common vocabulary. When we speak of spirituality, it is something very different from what we might call the spiritual dimension of a person. I've sensed that there's much confusion, that when we really mean a spiritual aspect of what a person is doing, we confuse that for a spirituality. For example, when a person works in art, the person who designed and painted this pottery, that person, man or woman, was using his or her spiritual dimension, a higher self, to objectify something very important in one's thinking into an art design. Another expression of the spiritual dimension is in music. For instance, take Mozart for instance. Mozart's music, when he composed the different symphonies and piano concertos, he was exercising a spiritual dimension of his self in the design of a musical setting. So the spiritual dimension, when we speak of the spiritual, it is something much, much larger than what we can term as spirituality. If we agree to that, we can move on to perhaps what could be a proposed definition for spirituality that we can all come to a consensus on. And the one thing that I would like to propose is that spirituality says something about the meaning of life. It's about the art of living. How do we compose our lives so that they make sense? Every human being wants to make sense of his or her life. Spirituality is a way in which one can give structure to life's meaning, how to explain suffering, pain, death, joy, happiness, um, all the great questions in one's life. Spirituality has as its end to respond in some way, to answer, to give a question or a direction on how one can answer these great problems that are in every human person. So, spirituality uh, says something about the meaning of life. Um, we can take a definition, for instance, that spirituality is something that is not in opposition to the material. There's no dualism in spirituality. If we could take a general view at it, um, uh, if there's no opposition between matter and spirit, but yet there's a tendency or a desire to transcend oneself. Um, we could say we have given it different labels to transcend oneself toward the sacred, towards God, towards the transcendent. There's this innate desire to move beyond oneself, to reach out for the more. Uh, it's a question, spirituality is a question about how does my life hang together? Or another way to say, how is there coherency between one's fundamental convictions and how those convictions are played out in one's behavior um, in a way that it gives sense. And there's a commitment to one's convictions in living out so that there is a coherency. And so spirituality that can be applied to New Age spirituality, Oriental spirituality, Judah, uh, the spirituality of Judaism or Islam, or any of the other spiritualities, would have something to say about the innate need to transcend oneself, to bring coherency to one's life, and to have a commitment at a very basic level towards living out in a very particular way that gives meaning to one's life and it answers the great questions before the person. This, if we agree to this, if there were a consensus that this could serve as a framework for an understanding of spirituality as the art of living, then there's a possibility of having a discussion and a sharing, a conversation in which the different spiritual traditions can learn and teach each other. Um, so, this is a definition for spirituality. It, uh, it could go like this: spirituality um, is not in opposition to materiality or carnality, but to mean the manner in which humans transcend themselves and reach out to the ultimate possibilities of their existence. As such, spirituality entails both an understanding of the deepest meaning of human existence and a commitment to realizing the same. This comes from the theologian Sebastian Kapp, who's a theologian in India. When it comes to Christian spirituality, there's a very clear definition. There's no ambiguity when we talk about Christian spirituality. Um, as I mentioned before, all spirituality is not necessarily taken within an understanding of the Christian matrix, but rather it's important to come to an agreement on how we use the term. A contribution can be made from the viewpoint of the Christian tradition. And when we speak about Christian spirituality, we're talking about something very specific. Mainly, it is this: that Christian spirituality is first and foremost rooted in the gospel. It is the art of living one's life according to the gospel. The understanding of Jesus' life, teaching, um, is that which illuminates how one puts one's life in order and understand the great questions that are posed to the person or the community That is spirituality. The touchstone is related to the gospel of Jesus Christ. For that reason, it is very, very important if one were to follow the Christian spirituality tradition. It's important that one knows the Gospels, or the New Testament, as we call it. This is what gives it its authenticity. And so, if we look at the Gospels, take this book for instance, which is the book of the Gospels. One person cannot live this out in its entirety. Rather, one has to make a choice. It has to make certain selections. It has to identify certain strands within the Gospels to live out. For instance, if we take this beautiful piece of cloth, the Gospel is like this. And a person would select a theme or a value from the Gospel and live that in a very intense way. For instance, one might find a great devotion to the value of compassion. And so one would take the strand of compassion and live it intensely, and therefore have a spirituality of compassion, something very basic in the Gospels. Or one might take a theme from the Gospels, like the cross, and take that strand and develop a spirituality of the cross. It is also possible that one would follow the spirituality of a holy person, like St. Francis of Assisi, or St. Benedict, or Mother Teresa. And a person would identify with that particular spirituality and try to live that expression on how one's life hangs together, in which one finds meaning in one's life. And so, what is before us as we reflect on spirituality, and if one is a Christian, one must ask oneself, well, what scripture passage sticks out for me? What passage exists that my life vibrates, or I get I'm struck in a way that it makes sense for me? Well, when I meditate and work on that particular passage and work my life around that passage, I begin to develop my spirituality. And that spirituality will take on a characteristic on how one prays and what one does in a daily practice. And so, in summary, spirituality in general is a very ambiguous term, but it is not ambiguous when it comes to Christian spirituality, and more specific, Catholic spirituality. It's about being rooted in the Gospels and orientating one's life around some theme, a biblical theme, or biblical value found in the Scriptures, in which one lives that value intensely. That value or biblical theme influences one's prayer and one's relationship with one another, as well as in enabling the person to transcend himself or herself to reach out to one's ultimate possibilities.